Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Time Management Revolution podcast. Today, we have with us our guest, Francie Jain. Francie believes happy and productive communities are made up of people who strive and receive support to become their best selves. She founded Terawatt to create an impactful, affordable, and intellectually honest way to help everyone thrive. And we're going to learn a whole lot more about what that introduction means, starting with Francie. What does terawatt mean? Just that name, and then we can get into what your company does.
Sure, yeah. So terawatt means 1,000,000,000,000 watts of energy. And I picked it because of a bunch of different reasons. But one, I wanted to have a dictionary word as the name, a word that's in the dictionary, as opposed to Google, let's say, where we made it up. And I had a logo already that looked like a growing bush, a growing tree. And I like the idea of kind of like live wire or ground swell, like the idea of like the earth growing the tree. And I like the double entendre of terra, almost like tierra, like in Spanish, like the land. And then my logo also looks a little almost like a Chinese character. And so I ran it by a few people who read Chinese, and I said, "Oh, it looks kind of like the character for soil." And I was like, "Perfect." And so the idea is just like that the group produces the unit, and so to create 1,000,000,000,000 watts of energy, it's usually used in sentences talking about a country's use of energy. Like they'll say in India, they consume 7 terawatts of energy or something like that. And the idea is really the group creates the magic.
Oh, nice. And what exactly does Terawatt do beyond that meaning?
Yeah. So we are a B2B marketplace for group coaching. And the way that everyone understands it really well is we're basically like Airbnb for coaching, for executive coaches. And so what that means is we vet expert coaches and talent. Really, what we're looking for actually is talented coaches. So some of them are newish and some of them are oldish, or, you know what I mean, like very, very wise and have been doing this for 20, 30 years. So we have a whole range, but really it's like we're looking for talented people who are good people looking to help others grow. And we have almost about 100 coaches, and I'm like very ambitious for this, and I think it could very easily be global. But really, what we're looking to do is have these talented coaches and match them to people looking for coaches. So kind of like a matchmaker. And typically we work with employers who are buying group learning or group coaching or even one-on-one coaching on behalf of their employees. And what we try to do is try to find what the buyer is looking for. And then we create an RFP, which is like a request for proposal to the coaches who are appropriate. And then they send proposals back to us. And then we send that as a package to the employer and they pick from that. So it's kind of like if you were to go on Airbnb, instead of picking for a house, you're like, "Hey, I really want a coach who did this, who knows this, who knows this." And then we say, "Great." And then we, find all the different relevant people for you. And then, you can pick. I mean, the one thing we can do is either like, if people will give us their maximum budget, or people will say, "I really just want to see the range of costs." And that's really interesting too. Because sometimes if a coach isn't very busy, they'll give you a low rate. Sometimes if they're very busy, they'll give you a high rate, or sometimes they just always have a high rate, or sometimes always have a low rate, right? So you kind of never know a little bit what you're going to get based on the search. And I think that's kind of fun and cool just to see the range. And then obviously you see all the different kinds of personalities and backgrounds, and everyone's unique, So, and that's really, it's kind of like the Airbnb again, like every house is unique, even if you're like, 10 square mile, 10 block radius of I don't know where you're going, see a concert, right? And then like they're all will be different. And so you can just decide what makes sense for you.
I'd like to ask a question that I think a lot of leadership should hear. A lot of leaders will say that absolutely, I support my team, I support my employees, I want them to have the best professional development possible. And yet, a lot of companies will wait until the last minute to try to search out their professional development, or it just gets pushed off to the side. We're going to do it later. We're going to do it later. We're going to do it later. So, if you were in front of a room full of
Mhm.
leaders, how would you explain to them how important professional development is? How important is learning in supporting your team?
Yeah, well, the really cool thing is that there's a strong relationship between professional development and employee turnover. And that is that companies that support professional development and also manage for metrics are the best companies in the world. And that was a study that done by McKinsey. And then there's also the way, if you think about, we have a case study internally through one of our coaches showing that as professional development gets utilized by the organization, the retention gets higher, and then the retained earnings go up. So it was a hospital. They were like a hospital system, and they had a 24% employee turnover rate. And the group coaching that was kind of, it was optional for everyone. And the CEO down to like the janitor did it. And so everyone had a shared sort of communication system because they all did it. It's like the same sort of idea. And ultimately they took their voluntary employee turnover down to 4%. So from 24% to 4%. And that difference from the peak to the trough was $32 million a year. So one of the things I think people don't pay attention to is they say, well, yeah, our turnover is about 15% a year. Oh, yeah, our turnover is about 30% a year, but that's industry average. Okay, but like there's a cost to that. You know, there are direct costs and there are indirect costs. And you can be above average. Just because the industry has an average doesn't mean you can't be better than everyone else. And the thing that's funny about when professional development is done really well and everyone's kind of bought in, everything starts to get improved, right? So like, for instance, in like the hospital space, like medical errors go down, patient experience goes up, you know, retained earnings go up. I mean, it's the same thing for anywhere else. You know, the more that people are engaged and they care like it's their own business, efficiencies go up, processes are improved. And so, you know, there's really no downside to professional development. I think in the past, people didn't understand this, like this data science of it, like what is the relationship of these things and what's kind of the ROI that I can expect. And it's actually, human capital ROI is actually incredibly high. And so I think that the key is to really understand and start to dig into like, what's the average ROI you can kind of expect, and then to do tests and just to see if that works for you, if there's a way to change it, and then you can, you know, tweak it to make it better for your organization. But I think that there's no substitute for like getting people really engaged and like caring. And the other thing that's really cool is like, when you do it well, everyone can be an A player, right? I mean, it's not like it's not the grass is greener syndrome where you're always just kind of hiring stars from other places. You're like, we really want to invest in our people and make them great and like have this like team cohesion and have that be the culture of our organization. And I just think that a lot of people who are striving to solve retention issues or engagement issues, it can be solved through professional development. And that's kind of what we do, right? And so professional development is kind of a wide umbrella. And even with our stuff, there's so many different ways you can think about it. But, you know, I think the ability, you want to have the ability to like learn a little bit and be curious about what's out there and what seems like appropriate for your organization. You know, I'm always like fascinated by this thing of psychological safety, the study of psychological safety. And there's a study in 2015 from Google that showed that their most successful teams, like the single unifying thread was high psychological safety. And no one's really figured out how to bring that to organizations at scale. And I think the reason is that you really have to do organization-wide professional development where everyone's learning the same stuff. And so that's really what we're working on.
Okay. Now, if a leader, let's say, has realized I absolutely need to make sure that I invest in the professional development, just doing any old professional development won't necessarily give you the improvements that you want for your company. So, what advice would you have for those with the decision-making capabilities in their organization? How do they decide what type of professional development their organization needs?
Yeah. So, well, for one thing, I do think the way to start is to make it opt-in for employees. So I've always thought that it would be so cool if it was like people, every individual at an organization had a percentage of their salary devoted to professional development, and they could spend it however they like. That to me is like crazy cool, because whether you're learning something that benefits you at home or learning something that benefits you at work, it will benefit you at work, right? I mean, we take ourselves wherever we go. So if you're getting better at managing, let's say, your time at home, that will definitely, you'll manage your time better at work as well. And so I think that like giving the employees the option to decide for themselves is really valuable. I think that the reason that case study worked so well, that one that I mentioned earlier, is because they took a perspective, which was the theory that they were working on was called opposite strengths, and it was a way to teach psychological safety. It was really also a lot about respect of differences, and that was really valuable because they just had so many different teams within these hospitals working together, and that worked well because people opted in. They were not told they had to do it. It wasn't like something they had to do in order to do something else or move forward. And I think what that ended up doing was the people that joined it and that learned from it, the other people that hadn't started to see like how they were communicating really well and how it was helping them be more effective. Mm-hmm. And then they did it on their own, with their own volition. And I just think that like you just can't underestimate the need for humans to choose for themselves and just find different ways. I think the other thing that's really important is surveying employees. And really understanding what they want. And it doesn't have to be like, you're surveying employees in every major decision the CEO makes, but kind of things where you're thinking, for instance, this came up in a conversation, okay, there's this organization, they have really high attrition rates of the lowest level. What are ways they can, retain those people better? And, one of the great things about surveys is you can ask them. It doesn't have to be a secret, It doesn't have to be like a surprise present. You can say, we really want to do a better job retaining you. These are 5 things we've come up with. What do you think about them? Is there a 6th or 7th thing that you think would be really valuable? I mean, one thing as I was thinking about that question is I was doing some research, and, right now, Gen Z has a very high level of student debt, and it's growing. And there's been a lot of discussion about Gen Z being more interested in learning on the job and getting sort of academic credentials on the job and not having to pay for it themselves. And that could be an incredible way to do it, right? Where you say, we'll pay for your, this master's or this, whatever, this degree. And in exchange, you agree to stay with us for 5 years or whatever the thing is. That kind of stuff where you get creative about facts that exist among a large group of people is a great way to do it.
Well, in reading a bit about your background and looking at a couple of your other interviews, one of the topics discussed was burnout. So currently, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you reading about within your realm about burnout and the cause of burnout?
Yeah. So one obsession I have is that people always talk about burnout as an individual problem. And it's kind of silly because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like all of a sudden you stub your toe and it's only that person's fault or something like that. Even if you stub your toe, right? Maybe there's there's something wrong with the floor, but it's a systemic problem. And if there's one person suffering from burnout, then I think it's incumbent on organizations to really spend time thinking through what is happening to cause that. Because burnout also is a result of someone caring, right? It's someone who's engaged, but it's not working. Like what they're trying to do, they are feeling like the organization is failing them. Or they're not connected anymore to the mission of the organization. That's another kind of burnout. And that might just be that, and that might be a little bit different, right? If you decided to join, let's say, finance, and then this is, I think, what midlife crisis is, right? And you've gotten to a certain level of success, and then you kind of feel like, this is great, but I don't feel as excited to go to work every day. Whatever the mission of that organization, or perhaps the lack of one, creates a bit of burnout or, this midlife crisis, because you're not sure why you're doing it anymore. And I think, and so for burnout, that to me is a highly systemic problem. And I think what you really need to do is think about what's going on with, what's the conflict? Because typically, I think this, in the healthcare space, it's the conflict of care for the patient versus the rules, versus what you're allowed to do. And that's obviously a big problem if the person is, and you hear about this nurse burnout a fair amount. So if you hear about the nurses burning out because they're not able to give the care that they want to give, that is so sad and terrible. And like nobody wants that, because there's also a relationship between patient experience and employee experience. So there's a great NIH study showing that nurse burnout is correlated with level of care to the patient. And so like the higher level of nurse burnout, like the lower level, like safety culture, the higher level of nurse burnout, like the lower, the patient experience score, higher level of nurse burnout, higher error rate. I mean, there's a lot that goes with it. So it just goes to show that burnout is really a sign of things like not working. It's not a sign of, over-engagement, or a sign of an individual having some issues. There's some like schism there.
And I know that you've mentioned medical examples several times, but for anybody listening who's not in the medical field, all of this definitely applies, because I hear about burnout in every single industry that I work with, whether it's engineering or fuel or sales or plastics or what have you. And I believe that you are right. It can definitely be systemic. It's more than just that one individual. And what I have found is that you mentioned, if they've lost sight of the mission, or perhaps that organization doesn't have the mission or hasn't shared it enough, and that ties in directly to time management, which is my wheelhouse. Because if you lose sight of the mission, it's so much more difficult to make those prioritization decisions on the spot when you have chaos going on. So that's why paying attention, focusing on that mission, and making sure everybody is living and breathing that mission is so important. So it's time management, it's burnout, it's everything, that mission just starting off at the top.
And it makes me wonder if in more corporate America, I mean, one of my questions, I don't know, but one of my questions in corporate America is burnout a result of things becoming more about politics than actually the North Star? Like the North Star to me is like the mission, right? Like why you do this, like what the goal is, what we're all rowing towards. But if in the end, it all kind of is coming into this like game of speaking in meetings, seeming like you know what you're talking about, scoring points with debating, as opposed to actually getting stuff done and moving the ball forward. I always felt like I was really disadvantaged in the corporate world because I was just really bad at politics. Like I just really didn't understand it. And I didn't understand because I was always sort of like just going for the goal, whatever the goal was. And I would get caught up in these things where I was so confused about why people were being weird. And ultimately, I think there was a little bit of like gamesmanship going on that I just wasn't really aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder about that sometimes because, you know, like you'll see about these people who are like handpicked, let's say by CEO. Like I often think of like is it Immelt at GE, who was handpicked by, I forget the guy who was so famous. But the idea is that the former CEO loved him, but he wasn't very effective. He was just a great colleague to that CEO. It doesn't matter, you know what I mean? He wasn't an effective CEO. And so sometimes
Mm-hmm.
someone who's really effective may not get along with other people. They might not play well because they're not playing the politics. They're following their North Star or their what they think is right, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to what makes the leader or the decision maker happy. And I think that can be a source of this as well, which is, trying to figure out a way to get people to like care about what you're caring about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And having that skill, um, I believe people would classify it as a soft skill. And I
Yeah.
want to jump back over into professional development again. Specifically, can you explain the difference between a soft skill and a hard skill?
Oh,
And
yeah.
why soft skills are equally important?
Yeah. So the funny thing about it is, I think I spend a little bit of time in the hospital space, and so I often think about these like analogies that way. But a hard skill is basically like the doing, right? It's like if you're in the widget making business, it's knowing how to make the widget, it's knowing how to run the machines of the widget. But it's it's like communicating with humans and convincing them or trying to get them to see what you see. That to me is what soft skills are. And the thing about humans is we all think we communicate well. So when people see the word, communicate, they see like a headline will be like, communication seminar, whatever, everyone like rolls their eyes. It's like, I know how to communicate, give me a break. But it turns out that when you actually equip them with like self-knowledge, like a personality test or something like that, they're like shocked, not shocked, but like this moment, this like revelatory moment of like, oh yes, this explains me and these are my people. And we all share a set of like priorities and how we see the world. And we are different from these other people. But that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to communicate with them. It just means that what works for me does not work for them. And so I think the more that there's like self-knowledge and, trying to get people to connect. And so anyway, I guess the whole thing is like humans are humans, right? And they're not machines. And you can't live your life with an AI in your pocket. At some point, you have to connect with humans and communicate what you want or get them to see what you want. And to me, the soft skills are like, it's what makes the hard work happen. Because a lot of ways, like the hard work is the doing when the decision is made. It's kind of like the making of the decision and trying to come up with the best decision is the soft skills. But I also think it's also recognizing. It's like things like that you sometimes forget, like recognizing people, thanking them, caring about their lives, recognizing people as people and not like automatons. And someone made a great point the other day. They said, there's a difference between like managing and leading. And like, that's a great example. I think managing is really much more like the Industrial Revolution. Like we're like trying to get people to dig faster for an hour. Whereas, leading is really helping people like use their brains and think more creatively and, like de-silo and come up with like good creative solutions. And so I think those are the two ways. It's like 20th century v 21st century. I think leading is really what we should be doing with humans. Because if you're doing brain work, you really need, I think you need much to be connected and engaged and excited about what you're working on, as opposed to just like doing the humans being the hard work, being the hard labor. You know what I mean? It's really like more about ideas, I think, in the white collar world.
And continuing on with our professional development theme, my expertise is time management. And I hear so many people say, I really need time management courses, or my team really needs time management courses, but we don't have time for them. So
yeah.
when you are working with an organization and you hear a line like that, because it's not just time management courses, it's any kind of professional development. how do you explain to that organization that you're not losing time when you take this course, you are investing in your humans?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit chicken and the egg when you start to do that thing like we don't have the time. Because how much time could you be saving? It's kind of like, oh, I don't have any money to invest in the stock market. Okay, well, then maybe spend less money so you can invest in the stock market. You know what I mean? You have to make a change to make a change, right? I mean, you have to change something you're doing. And one of the things I'll say is it's very common these days to have professional development happen within the workday. When I was like a young worker out of college, the professional development was all like outside of office of 9 to 5 hours, you know, and it was meant to be on your own time. And that's just not the case anymore. And not to mention Gen Z expects employers to, you know, bring the professional development to them. I just think you have to look at it as an investment. And the other thing I would say is it's really the same thing as like an IT investment. Like when you're changing your IT in whatever, you name it, hardware, software, whatever, there's always going to be a period of adjustment, and it's going to be a little bit annoying, but it has to be done because you've made this investment and you know this will be better in the long term, or it'll be better tomorrow, or it'll be better the day after you do it. And it's the same with all the soft skills, you know, the same with time management. I mean, if you're having trouble with time management, like I think you want to figure out your priorities, right? Like what is your number one priority? You know, is your priority meetings? Probably not. Your number one priority is whatever your business is trying to do, you know? And I think, like you said, you can't do anything unless you have the North Star, because then you're like a chicken with your head cut off, you know, because you're just like responding to emails like a maniac, or, you know, doing other things that are unproductive, or being in meetings because you want to make sure everyone understands what's happening, which is great because you're communicating, but could their time be better spent? And maybe could there be another way where you make sure everyone's on the same page? But that's an interesting, I mean, again, like I'm not, like that's your expertise, but I think that that's a really interesting challenge, because I do kind of love those all hands meetings, because it's a time when people are in person and they're telling everyone what's going on, and you kind of really understand like the day to day of what's happening. But at the same time, you know, like a lot of things that I've read, at least I'm sure you know better, but like, you know, a lot of times meetings could be emails, right? And like, do you have to have people in meetings, and are meetings planned well, and all this stuff, and all these different questions. And so I don't know, I think all those come into, you know, they all come into play with this, but I think, yeah, like you're right. I mean, you have to just decide it's an investment, and like, and just accept it's going to be a little bit annoying to integrate it into your day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like to spend the last part of an interview talking about the guest as an individual. So that means you, Francie,
Yeah,
asking, yes, some more personal questions, but hopefully not intrusive.
yeah.
One of those questions is, you have been through different iterations in your career. And to some people, that's really scary. So, how
Oh,
did
yeah.
you know it was time to do something different? And how did you get over any fear that you had?
Okay, yeah. So that's a great question. So this is like, it turns out I never, until recently, this is one of my superpowers, is that I have very little fear in switching jobs. For some people, they might say that means you don't stay in a job long enough. You know, there's two different sides of that coin. I don't know. I'm a big optimist. And so it never really scared me. It was more that I was more attracted to this other thing out there, which was the other role. And I wanted to try to find a way to kind of like get in there. And I, you know, lived for a long time in New York City, and you know, a lot of it was just kind of networking with people and talking to them and telling them what I was looking to do and trying to find people to speak to. And even if it was just like, hey, I'm trying to get smarter in this space because I find it really interesting. Do you know anyone in this space? And then you might meet a person and they say, oh, you know, you should really connect to so-and-so. And then they would connect me to so-and-so. And after a while, things start to work out, and, you know, I was able to find a job. But I do think that for the vast majority of people, that's not the case. Like, I think most people find that really scary. And my joke is, I know this because when I was doing all that kind of stuff, my family would be like, what is happening? What are you going to do? Like, how's it going to work? How are you going to pay the rent? And I'm like, chill, like, relax, like, it'll work out. And that was actually my initial impetus for starting Terawatt. Really, it's just that, like, I realized that there really should be more support for people who, want to be great in life, want to switch careers, want to like be their best. And like, where was that location? And so that's kind of what we are meant to be. And like, that's actually our North Star, right? We have 3 stakeholders, is making sure all 3 of them have the ability to be excellent and be great. And everything's aligned so that they are equally advantaged in our organization and no one's disadvantaged. And so I guess just what I would say is, I think it's like optimism and like a can-do attitude, and trying to work with the resources I have and get advice. I think that all that also, by the way, I was always employed during these times too, right? So you can do it while you're working. It's just a lot of copies or, connecting or whatever. But now I think with like LinkedIn, and like in those days, LinkedIn was very nascent, and, it was a little bit like annoying. People thought you were kind of annoying if you're on LinkedIn, but now it's like very common. I think for someone to say, oh, hey, I see you're connected to so-and-so. I'd love to connect to that person. And that happens a fair amount.
Mm-hmm. Some people think that failure is a horrible thing, and they absolutely fear failure, which is why they don't want to take steps forward. Whereas some others don't even consider the word failure. They just look at it as a learning opportunity. So no matter how you view it, what do you think has been your biggest lesson in your professional life, whether you call it failure or a learning opportunity?
Yeah. So it's so funny because for me, failure always was like, it wasn't that I wasn't failing in things. I just didn't use that word. It was sort of like failure always felt like, I don't know, you fell off the side of a cliff. You know what I mean? It was just like this definitive crazy thing that would happen and you would never come back again. So that being said, oh my God, I spaced on the question. What was the question again? Oh, how did I not fear failure?
Well, what's your biggest the biggest lesson you've learned in your professional career, whether you consider it failure or the learning?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I don't think it's a failure, but I think of it as like, if I knew this before like this would have been great. So my biggest lesson, I think, was like my last like full on like corporate job. And I wish I had gone in with a set of expectations from the employer saying, this is what great looks like. This is what we expect you to do. And if this all hits, then this happens, whatever that is, this bonus, this promotion, blah, 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 whatever. And because what happened, I realized is when I went into this organization, I did a great job and I did better than they expected. But what happened was everyone's expectations changed as things started working. And that to me was such a lesson of like, nail it down, because people forget. And I know this, and what I really know about this is I'm really bad, and a lot of my friends are really bad at like, if I were to tell you a fact and then you learn it and then you're kind of like, great, and now I know the fact, but like, I told you that, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's easy to forget that this fact was not known the day before, or that someone else brought you the fact. And there's something about the like immediately globbing onto new information and forgetting what had been, like what was before you had that information. And that to me is just so valuable as a working person, especially in like maybe a not super structured place. And I think that's also part of what was going on there as well. Is it was, a hedge fund, and it was a little bit like loosey-goosey, everyone's role. And we're just like, we all knew the North Star, right? And everyone was really clear on working hard for it. But it was sort of, the things changed after a year. What seemed like a really good success is like now par for the course and not exceptional. And I think that's why it's really important to put it on paper and, have a date and then revisit that and see what's changed, because that is like, I really think about that all the time, and how like that's really a great way to protect yourself and also grow, because then you're writing down your goals, what you're working on, and then you're able to like say, okay, this week I'm working on these 3 goals that will help me for like what great looks like after a year.
That helps explain your emphasis on metrics. you need your starting metrics and then
Yeah.
a stationary target instead of this constant skeet shoot and nobody ever knows exactly where you are. So, yes,
Oh,
totally agree.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And that's actually a great point because if you do group coaching, but you don't measure it before and you don't measure it afterward, you kind of forget what you didn't know. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's just part of what you know, and you're just moving along, and you don't realize how much of a jump may have happened,
Yeah.
as one group has learned something and by the way, if that one group learned something, are they teaching it to other people within the
Mm-hmm.
organization? So you
Mm-hmm.
also want to be testing what's happening with the broader organization in addition to the individual group, because there's seepage, like people talk to each other. And so you can't just like keep knowledge in, and you don't want to anyway. But I think it's just valuable to understand what's the starting, what's the ending, and let's measure it. And then let's see what we can do next time. I
Mm-hmm.
think, I don't know about other people, but I feel like I sometimes feel like that's annoying because I want to just go, 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 go. And I don't want to stop to measure. But actually,
Mm-hmm.
the measuring is what helps you realize how far you've come.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
that's what's hard because you don't want to stop to reflect, but actually the reflection enables you to feel like proud of yourself and then
Mm-hmm.
give you the momentum to keep going and maybe teach other people or
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, everything that we've talked about today, even though it's been a lot about professional development, it's been about burnout, it actually is strategic related to time management, right down to the last question, which was about for you the measurements and making sure that there are measurements taken throughout. That's huge because otherwise it can be a huge waste of time just spinning your wheels, not knowing where you're going. So now I'd like to ask a tactical question related to time management, and that is obviously you are good at time management in some sort of way to be able to have this successful career. So, what do you think is your personal best practice related to time management? What is it that you do that helps you stay focused during the day or stay more organized during the day?
that's a great question. Well, a few years ago, I remember someone making some hysterical remark saying, like, is your job responding to emails quickly? And I remember thinking, now that is a good question because no, almost nobody has a job where their job is to respond to emails quickly, unless you're in customer service. Um, and so I try really hard not to be drawn in by my email inbox. Um, this is really, I don't know if this is helpful to other people, but for me, one of the ways that I really prioritize is I sort of think about like, what am I most concerned about? Like, what is the impending deadline or the thing that I'm worried about? And that may or may not be helpful to other people, but for me, that is helpful because it sort of means like, okay, I got this deadline coming up. I really need to focus and prioritize this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes also it even might be like a long-term thing that like it's somehow like really weighing on me. And so I spend a little bit of time on the long-term thing. But it helps me because then I'm not anxious or like with disoriented or, whatever the word is, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm really in the moment because I'm really focused on like solving this one problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do that. I read something one time that when you write things down, you're more likely to do them. And
Mm-hmm.
then I read another thing that said, as an entrepreneur, you should really just have on your to-do list like 2 things a day. And so I really try to have like 2 or 3 things on my to-do list per day. Um, and I think that's a really good one. I also try to separate like my work to-do list and like my personal to-do list.
Okay.
And sometimes I put my personal things in the calendar so I don't forget.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like pick up dry cleaning, like it's really dumb stuff like that. But like otherwise I'll forget. And
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
I have to put it in because these like it's not like you can be on the internet and pick up your dry cleaning. You have to be there in person during their hours when they're open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'd say those are my main ones. I think I love the writing down the few key things to do because that I
Mm-hmm.
am really that person. Like if I write it down, I will do it. And I don't know what that is, but it really helps me.
Well, thank you for sharing those. Very much appreciated. And I'm sure others who are listening are going to pick up on at least one of those. Perhaps it's affirmation like, yes, I do that. Or it's maybe thinking about, maybe I should do that because it's going to be helpful. Well, to close out for today, can you please share with everyone if they would like to connect with you? How can they connect with you on social media, or how can they find out more about Terawatt?
Yeah. So if they're interested in talking to me about being a coach or hiring Terawatt, the best way to do it is we have a get in touch page on our website. So it's terawatt.co, no M, and then get in touch. And then there's a way to set up a call. And then our best social media is LinkedIn. So they can follow me or follow Terawatt. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And yeah, just because we're B2B, that's where it makes the most sense. And then our website is, pretty good. And one of the things that we do on our website that I'm really proud about is that we connect our coaches, and we make it really easy to find who our coaches are and learn more about our coaches. So that can be really fun too. If you go to the Find a Coach page, we list all of our coaches, like they have a headshot and then a little bit about them and who they work with. We list their website and their podcast and their professional, and also, LinkedIn. So it's podcast, professional website, and LinkedIn. And those are great ways to learn about a person. And that's, and we do that because really we want to be in the business of group coaching. And so we want it to be easy for the coaches to find their one-on-one clients. And we also want to be a resource of talented people out there, because there's something like 2,000 certifying bodies for coaches. And so it's so hard to know, how do you find a good coach? And the other issue is coaches are primarily find work through word of mouth, which can be hard if you're on the other end. If you don't know a coach and you don't know anyone who knows a coach, how are you supposed to find the good coaches? And so we want to be a resource for those people as well.
Okay, wonderful. Francie Jain, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Helene. It's a pleasure.